Oh, I can reach that over.
We're all got so quiet.
I like to jump, actually. Tear my Achilles tendon going down the line.
Welcome everyone. It's so great to see you all here. Thank you for joining us both in person and online. I have a little camera here I'll give a wave to. I'm Grace McCall and I'm an employee here, and tonight I'm very excited to welcome Jess Walter here at Green Apple Books to celebrate the release of his latest novel, So Far Gone. Let's give an applause. We like to open every event with a land acknowledgement. We are on unceded Ramaytush Ohlone land. We believe that acknowledgement requires action, and we encourage you to donate either your time or a monetary donation to an Indigenous organization each time you hear land acknowledgement. And we have details how to contact the Ramaytush Ohlone Land Trust at the back desk, where you can learn more about how to participate in this project of rematriation. I have a few just housekeeping things. Now is a great time to turn off your phone, silence it. It's just, there's always one person whose phone goes off. We have a very stacked event calendar every month. You can check that out on our website. We also have signs around the store. We also really encourage you to buy both the book we're highlighting tonight and the many other titles we have in the store. I've been told that pictures are okay, so go ahead and snap those away.
No painting.
And so tonight we have Jess Walter, who is the author of 7 previous novels, including the bestsellers The Cold Millions and Beautiful Ruins. His short fiction, collected in The Angel of Rome and We Live in Water, has won the O. Henry Prize, the Pushcart Prize, and appeared 3 times in the Best American Short Stories. He lives in his hometown in Spokane, Washington. His latest book is the reason we're here tonight. Please join me in welcoming Jess Walter.
Has the feel of an open mic night, doesn't it? Like I'm going to pull out a banjo and start torturing you. Thank you all for coming. It's so great to be back in San Francisco and to be back on book tour. My last novel came out in 2020 during the pandemic, and somewhere in author land, we all got together and said, is there any way we could make readings more boring? And then we decided to put them online. So to be back out in the world, meeting readers and talking about literature has just been amazing. It is strange, I have to say, to go out during these divided political times. And that's part of what the book is about, so I suppose it's fitting. But right before I came here, I had some events in different places, including Boise, Idaho. And when you go on book tour, your publicist will say, will give you sort of little hints about what you're supposed to talk about at various events. And I was doing this event in Boise, and she said they wonder if you can talk for about 10 minutes about book banning. And my first thought was, I'm going to be in Idaho. Is it pro or con? And so I thought, well, I'll write a speech that can do both. And so, which was actually great fun to do, because Idaho had just passed a law. Is this microphone picking me up? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Idaho had just passed a law that said that if parents challenge a book and librarians don't move it, then they have status essentially to sue the librarian themselves. Like one of the strangest pieces of legislation. So thankfully the group I spoke to was in fact fighting this sort of tyrannical approach to to somehow taking books off of shelves. But I still got to deliver my sort of funny speech in which I pretended to congratulate them on everything they'd done and said, that I know that a lot of people might be worried that, look, you've given your kid this device where they can immediately call up 3 million images of pornography in a second. But it's so great that you've gone after the real problem books, because I would hate for a kid to get a book on same-sex penguins and then somehow be turned gay or worse, penguin, from reading this book. And so that you're fighting the good fight, thank you. And look at the incredible progress you're making. A recent study by a federal organization that used to track education numbers until the Trump administration totally defunded it, recently found out that the percentage of 13-year-olds that read for fun almost every day has fallen in the last 5 years from 27% to 14%. So if you good parents of Idaho can just keep this up, we can get that down to 0, which is where it belongs. So anyway, it was sort of great fun preparing this almost Steve Colbert-like speech and delivering it to them, and they were thankfully very happy. It's also been wild to be out talking about a book that's sort of timely too, because I've had to be interviewed by reporters more than in my daily life as just someone who trudges out to his office and writes. And I've noticed something about myself when I'm doing events and talking to reporters, that I have a sort of rhetorical style that leads me into saying something kind of ridiculous. And everything leading up to it makes sense. But the only thing that ever appears in the newspaper or on TV or on a podcast is the one ridiculous thing that I end on. The most obvious example is when I was interviewed by the New York Times a few years ago, and I was talking about a Shakespeare club I'm in, a group of writers and professors. We get together, we read the plays, and then we get together and just talk about them. And we're all in our 50s, some in our 60s, and we're at this stage in life where Shakespeare means something else to us. The description of loss and love and ambition, the way these plays circle around the desires that often lead to the downfall of these characters. I was telling the reporter from the New York Times, I said, it's wild to me that we have high school students read Shakespeare, because you don't really understand the depths of humanity that he's writing about at that age. And then I said the thing that I still can't believe escaped my mouth. I said, having high school students read Shakespeare is kind of like showing porn to toddlers. And you can imagine exactly the only quote that showed up in the New York Times from that whole conversation. And so I thought I had kind of cured myself of that habit of following some rhetorical point all the way to my own embarrassment. And then right before this book came out, because it's about the state of the world now and the divisions that exist in them, a reporter was asking me, what did I hope people would get out of it? Did I hope to change the minds of radical right-wing readers, for instance? And I said, that's not really why I write fiction. It's certainly not what I set out to do. And then somehow I said, in fact, I'm not sure fiction really has that role, that it can change people's minds that way. I swear that story posted online, and within a minute and a half, I had an email with the subject line, Uncle Tom's Cabin, ? Oh, that was followed by emails with dozens of novels that have totally changed people's minds. And I realized I had said the very opposite of what I believe, because I totally believe fiction can change people's minds. It's one of the reasons I write it. I know how my mind has been changed. And so to be out now talking about a book that is sort of timely, that I think speaks to, for many of us, friendships, family, the creases that have developed in our culture. I actually do hope that a few minds are changed. I find it hard to believe because many of them are very closed, but I'm very hopeful anyway. And speaking of hopeful, I'm going to read just a little bit. I don't tend to read too much from my books when I go out. My dad was worked for 35 years at an aluminum plant. I'm a first-generation college student, and I remember when I'd first go out on book tour, he would say, what do you do on book tour? And I'd say, well, I go to universities and bookstores, and I give readings. And he would say, you wrote the damn thing? You have to read it to him, too? And so I promised my dad I wouldn't read very much. So this is from Chapter 1, What Happened to Kinnick. It doesn't require much setup. This is our main character, Reese Kinnick, who lives out in the woods. A prim girl stood still as a fence post on Reese Kinnick's front porch. Next to her, a cowlick boy shifted his weight from snow boot to snow boot. Both kids wore backpacks. On the stairs below them, a woman held an umbrella against the pattering rain. It was the little girl who'd knocked. Kinnick cracked the door. He rasped through the dirty screen, "Magazines or chocolate bars?" The girl, who looked to be about 10, squinted. "What did you say?" Had he misspoken? How long since Kinnick had talked to anyone? "I said, what do you fine young capitalists selling? Magazines or chocolate bars?" "We aren't selling anything," said the boy. He appeared to be about 6. "We're your grandchildren." A sound came from Kinnick's throat then. A gasp. He might have written it back when he wrote for a living. Of course they were his grandchildren. He hadn't really looked at their faces, and this strange woman on the steps had thrown him. But now that he did look, he saw family there, in the pronounced upper lip and the deep-set, searching eyes. No, clearly this was Leah and Asher. Christ, when had he seen them last? He tried to remember, straining to apply an increasingly muddled concept, time. His daughter had brought them up here for a short visit one afternoon. When was that? 3 years ago? 4? Either way, these were not strangers selling candy for their school. These were his grandkids. Flesh and blood of Reese Kinnick's flesh and blood, his only child, Bethany, but older than 6 and 10. More muddled time work was required to figure out how much. "Mr. Kinnick?" The woman with the umbrella was speaking now. Yes, he said, I'm Kinnick." He addressed the kids again. Is everything, are you? The thoughts came too quickly for his mouth to form around them. He opened the door wider. "Where's your mother?" "We're not sure," Leah said. "Mom left a couple of days ago. She said she'd be back in a week. Shane left yesterday to find her." This was 13-year-old Leah. Her father was Bethany's old boyfriend, sluggish Doug, long out of the picture. The boy, 9-year-old Asher, was shithead Shane's kid. Oh, the riddle of time and of Bethany's taste in men. Kinnick looked at the woman behind his grandchildren. She was black, with big round glasses, in her 30s if he had to guess, roughly his daughter's age. She climbed the last step onto the porch. "I'm Anna Gaines," the woman said. "My husband and I live in the same apartment complex as Bethany and Shane. This morning Leah came over with this." She held out an envelope. On it, written in Sharpie in Bethany's handwriting, "For Anna." Below that, "In case of emergency." "Mom left it in the closet," Leah said, "in one of my snow boots." Kinnick opened the front screen, came out, and took the envelope. He removed a single sheet of paper, handwritten on both sides in Bethany's neat, backward-leaning script. He patted his shirt pocket for his readers, then squinted to make out the note. "Dear Anna, if you're reading this, I had to leave in a hurry. I know this is a lot to ask, but can you take the kids to my father, Reese Kinnick? He is a recluse." Kinnick looked up. "I'm not a recluse." He looked down and began reading again. "Dear Anna, if you're reading this, I had to leave in a hurry. I know this is a lot to ask, but can you take the kids to my father, Reese Kinnick? He is a recluse who cut off contact with our family." "I did not cut off contact. It was—" Reese felt his blood rising. "Complicated." But his grandchildren just stared at him, apparently as uninterested in nuance and complexity as everyone else in the world. Kinnick grunted again and went back to reading. "Dear Anna, if you're reading this, I had to leave in a hurry. I know this is a lot to ask, but can you take the kids to my father, Reese Kinnick? He is a recluse who cut off contact with our family and now lives in squalor." "Squalor?" Kinnick looked around his covered front porch. "Squalor?" In one corner, a broken old refrigerator stood next to a stack of used boat and car batteries and a burned-out inverter generator. In the other corner was his old Ringer washing machine and a single clothesline from which hung a pair of jeans and a sweatshirt. What is this? In case of emergency, go find my father and make him feel terrible about himself? His grandchildren continued to stare. Kinnick groaned again, then resumed reading, vowing to make it through the whole letter this time. So Kinnick has been living up there since 2016 when, in a When he got laid off from his job as a newspaper reporter, an environmental reporter at his local newspaper, and he happened to go to his daughter's house for Thanksgiving, promising that he wouldn't talk politics with his radical right-wing son-in-law, Shane, the aforementioned shithead Shane. And Reese really tries. He says, we won't talk politics, we'll talk religion. And he's nursing a beer, and as I write, he sat helplessly between the dim husbands of daughter and ex-wife, quietly nursing his fourth beer. He was a terrible nurse. This patient wasn't likely to make it either. And as Reese is sitting there, he's trying desperately to not argue politics and religion, and he thinks if they just watch football that perhaps everything will be okay. So I'm going to read one more little section and then talk a little more, and then I'd love to take questions. So this is him and Shane watching football, trying not to talk about anything that will ruin Thanksgiving. He glanced at Shane, all self-satisfaction and mud-flat mustache, chomping pistachios. It was blissfully quiet for a moment, and Kinnick thought the worst might be over. Then, on TV, a pass interference call went against the Green Bay Packers, and Shane leaned across the recliners and confided to Kinnick, they're in on it too, you know. It, Reese knew by now, was the elaborate and all-encompassing conspiracy to indoctrinate Americans into a satanic liberal orthodoxy whose end goal was to subsume good Christians like Shane into an immoral, one-world socialist nightmare in which people pooped in the wrong bathrooms. Kinnick urged himself to stay quiet, to not ask questions. If you didn't ask Shane for more information, he sometimes just muttered off into silence. Reese checked his watch. 35 minutes to turkey. He could make that. Surely he could be quiet for 35. Who? He heard himself ask. The officials? Are you saying the refs are in on it? Shane turned his head. Refs? Come on, Reese. You think the refs have that kind of power? Think for a minute. Who pays the refs? Okay, so Reese tried to keep it casual, asking over the rim of his beer, you're saying the National Football League is engaged in a massive conspiracy whose sole purpose is to deny victory to the teams you happen to like. It's got nothing to do with me, Shane said. It's common knowledge that politics and professional football were rigged the same year, 2008. That's when the globalists put forward the final part of their plan. They'd already taken over universities, schools, every level of government, and they were about to give us a certain foreign president whose name I will not say out loud, but whose middle name is Hussein. It was the final push. They were controlling sports, too. Don't forget who won the Super Bowl that year. No idea, Kinnick said. 2008? The New York Giants beat the New England Patriots? Think about it for just a second, Reese. The Patriots, as in real Americans, losing to the Giants of New York? Giants as in the beast that rises out of the sea with 7 heads and 10 horns? As in the 10 media companies and the 7 boroughs of New York City? Come on, Reese, you're a smart man. You think this is all a coincidence? There are 5 boroughs in New York, Shane, and thousands of media companies. Then it's 7 million. I get the numbers all mixed up. There are 8 million people, and I seriously doubt that many lived in New York when Revelations was written. I told you, that's not how the Bible works, Reese. It's a living document. It's really not, Shane. Believe what you want. Shane was getting red-faced, but I saw a thing online that explained the whole deal. He was always seeing things online that explained the whole deal, or deals online that explained the whole thing. Wait a second, Kinnick said, convincing himself that logic might still matter with Shane. But the Patriots won the Super Bowl last year. This somehow excited Shane even more, and he leaned in toward Kinnick and confided in him. I know, that was awesome, a sign of the coming triumph, a clarion call for Patriots to rise up and prepare for the final fight. See, New England wasn't supposed to win. The secular globalists picked Seattle to repeat as champions, but Brady and the Patriots wouldn't allow it. See, they broke the script, stole that game at the goal line, said, we would rather fight than surrender to the New World Order. That's why the NFL had to start the whole Deflategate controversy, to go after New England as a warning. This was the danger of winding up a toy like Shane. He could go on for hours like this, weaving every loose strand into a blanket of conspiratorial idiocy as he explained how, at the beginning of every season, NFL officials and team owners got together with TV execs who handed out scripts for the season. But in the 2015 Super Bowl, Brady, Belichick, and the brave Patriots refused to go along with the globalist, Satanist, liberalist agenda, and they struck a blow for the original America, New England, Patriots, 13 original colonies. It was the sort of logic hash that Kinnock had encountered when dealing with conspiracy theorists in his old job as a newspaper reporter, like the logger who once explained to him that some of the forest had been replaced with fake trees that were in fact surveillance devices. Gibber English, that's what Reese used to call it. New England's victory was a sign to all patriots, Shane said. We'd been waiting for a king to arise, and now he was on our way. This election would be our Valley Forge. I'm pretty sure at Valley Forge they were fighting against having a king, Shane. I'm just saying the call went out, the undaunted Shane said, and true patriots have answered, and our time is nigh. You know what? I got a thing at nigh. Reese pretended to look at his watch. Can we do it at 9:30? Maybe quarter to rapture? Reese glanced over at Celia's husband, a retired high school math teacher. Are you hearing this? But Cortland was snoring away. It was quiet for a few more minutes. Shane pouting at being teased, Kinnock doing his best to let it go. He would eventually tell Bethany this. I tried to let it go. Spoiler alert, he does not let it go. So that's Reese Kinnock. He has moved out to the woods in 2016, and when we pick him up in 2024, he's still been living there. He's only seen his daughter once since this blow-up at Thanksgiving when he punches his son-in-law in the face. And now his daughter has disappeared. He finds out his ex-wife has died. His 13-year-old granddaughter is betrothed to the 19-year-old son of the Christian Nationalist Church that shithead Shane now belongs to. And Reese has to come out of this exile that he's put himself in and possibly rescue these people and reconcile this family that he's lost. This book really came to me in a kind of fever in 2023 and 2024. I'm often working on a longer, bigger project, and then every once in a while an idea will come to me that just feels so of its moment and of its time that I think back to my career as a journalist, and I almost think of myself as a spot news novelist, that I have to almost cover this thing that is unfolding in front of me. And I remember when I first had this idea, I don't know how many of you have felt this way, but I saw a political cartoon that kind of summed up what I was thinking when I started writing this book. It's a car speeding down the highway toward a sign that says, "Can't look away." And that's how I felt about the news. I don't know if you guys get that notification from your cell phone on Sunday telling you that you've somehow spent 5 hours and 12 minutes every day on your phone. I was stunned the first time this happened. I literally get 3 texts a day. What am I doing on my phone? But I was doom scrolling throughout 2023 and 2024. And on that highway where that car is going toward Can't Look Away, there was another off-ramp that the artist had drawn that said, "Had enough." And I had just had enough. And I had this urge, what if you could just turn it all off? What if I could stop donating every time a bad piece of news happened and I wouldn't donate to a congressional candidate in South Dakota who just happened to get my phone number from the DNC. And that urge to just to check out. And at first, because I'm sort of a comic novelist, I saw it as almost a comic Rip Van Winkle thing. Like, what if you moved up to the woods in 2016 and then you emerged in 2024 and said, well, that must all be over, right? But then, as often happens with fiction, what really opened up for me was the idea of these people, these characters, and how to connect to them. And so even the rant that I started with Shane, which was pretty much this is him explaining to himself why he had to run away. How to explain self-exile. Some of it had been the fight with Shane and Bethany's reaction. But much of it was the dark, sour turn the whole country had taken. As a journalist, as an American, as a rationalist, Kinnock had come to terms with the fact that 20% of his countrymen were greedy assholes. But then in 2016, the greedy assholes joined with the idiot assholes and the paranoid assholes in what turned out to be an unbeatable asshole constituency. Kinnock realizing that the asshole ceiling in the country was much higher than he'd thought, perhaps half the country. whatever the number, it was more than he could bear, especially when they were his own family. And so I think I really began the novel almost thinking of those rants that Rhys had, which are much more extreme than the ones that I play in my head. But that's often what I do, is create a heightened version of something. For instance, those Thanksgiving dinners. I imagine this is not the only family that has had awkward holiday dinners in the last 4, 6, 8, 12 years. And so taking a heightened version of that and then finding my way in. For me, I think the big surprise in the novel came out of this structure that I chose, because I was writing it feverishly and over a 1-year period, which is very fast for me. Most of my novels take much longer. Beautiful Ruins, my most well-known novel, took me 15 years, so that's my usual gestation period. But about every third novel comes to me this way, and I try to honor the way that the idea comes to me by writing it in that fashion. And so writing this in a propulsive, feverish pitch, a chase story, a kind of picaresque road trip. I was reading Charles Portis at the time, who's one of my favorite authors, True Grit and Dog of the South and Norwood, and he often writes these great road trip novels. And so that became, for me, the device to hold all these characters. But that first chapter is called What Happened to Kinnick, and each chapter opens that way. What happened to Bethany, his daughter? What happened to Asher, his grandson? What happened to Lucy, his ex-girlfriend? And through each of these characters, we see the main character, Rhys, and what's driven him to this point. But we also find our way into these other people. And that's the thing that I always love about writing fiction, and the thing that surprised me about this book. I knew the whole time that I would also be writing to the point, what happened to Shane? That I would go from the mockery and disdain that Rhys feels to the question that really animates much of my life, which is, are we really so far gone? Is Shane so far gone? Is Rhys so far gone in his anger and his feeling that the country has lost its way? And is the country so far gone? Can we come back from this divide? Can we find common cause and find a way again to be sharing the same worldview? I made Rhys a former journalist for a couple of reasons. Number one, I was a journalist, but also I think one of the reasons that we're in the state we're in is because we now live in these silos of information. In the 1960s, famously, writers would write about the generation gap, this gap between parents and their children. And we have a much more serious and dangerous gap now because we live in these worlds where we're taking in entirely different sets of information. If you're watching Fox News, you're getting this view of the world. If you're watching CNN, you're getting this. If you're reading the New York Times, you're getting that. I would use a similar right-wing publication, but there aren't any. That's just television. But whatever view of the world you're getting, that view combined with your values creates an entirely different reality. And that's what we have now, is this reality gap. And until we find a way to once again have a common sense of the world, I don't know that there's a way out. And so I realized that's what I was writing toward. In this one family, if I could reconcile this one family, I felt like it would give me a sort of sense of hope. I don't want to give away the ending, but I will tell you, my son calls me a toxic optimist. So there's a very good chance that you might find a little bit of hope in there. So I hope you enjoy the novel. I hope it's as funny and suspenseful for you reading it as it was for me writing it. And with that, I would love to answer any questions about this book or any other book or tax questions, anything you might have. Yes?
This is more like general. I've read so I got into your writing with Angel Form, which I think came out during COVID.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh my gosh, I love his writing. I gotta read all of his stuff. And your characters are all very different, and your stories take place in very different places. How do you cope with such so many new different ideas?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, The Angel of Rome was my last book of short stories. I love writing short stories for that very reason, because I can go in 12 different directions and create all these different characters. And I sometimes think of myself as one of those character actors in Hollywood whose name you can never remember, but they show up in every movie. And for me, that's often what fiction writing is like. And it's one of the reasons this book surprised me so much, is that I was writing toward characters that I didn't think I would be able to inhabit as well as some others. And yet, the thing we know about reading novels and the really heartbreaking thing about that statistic, that half as many 13-year-olds are reading for fun as used to, is that is how we build empathy. That's how we come to understand people who are not like us, or people who are who maybe are on the opposite end of the spectrum. And so yeah, that's the part that I love the most. I also carry this around with me, and I constantly jot down every idea and thing that I see, and I listen to conversations in restaurants. There's even a story in The Angel of Rome called Fran's Friend Has Cancer, about a young writer doing what I used to do, sitting in restaurants, just jotting down my ideas and listening to people talk. And I think in that way, as a young writer, it trained me to write dialogue, but it also just allows you to sit in on other worlds and hear them. So, but yeah, thank you. It's really is my favorite part of writing, and and probably the reason I always have at least one or two other books going.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Other questions? Yes, back there.
So, related to research, it seems like for this, you probably had to go where I would consider some dark places to do research, to come from these points of view. And like, I'm curious what your favorite sources were to get information from these different viewpoints, and like how it was for you to have to
the research into, it's funny, I was calling it radical right-wing thought, which is part of it, but it's really conspiracy thinking. And conspiracy thinking to me is, because of the breakdown of trust in media, what has swarmed in and what has swarmed over Twitter, now X, and on Facebook, are these wild conspiracy theories. And 1/3 of Americans believe that when they got COVID vaccine, microchips were slipped into their bodies. 1/3 of Americans believe Barack Obama was not born in the United States. Election denialism, 9/11 being perpetrated by the U.S. government. All of these have 20 to 30% of the population believing them. And so much of the research is just soaking up what's going on in the world around me. My very first book was about Ruby Ridge, a shootout in North Idaho in 1992. And so I have been covering and aware of these conspiracy theories and the way they especially have moved into radical right-wing thought, and how they've been used and weaponized by politicians to separate people from what really is their economic benefit. If we can get you to focus on the fact that there might be a book in the library that you don't like, then you won't notice the fact that billionaires are running the government right now. And it's wild and disheartening how well this has worked over and over and over, using these non-wedge issues. So a lot of it was really just sort of soaking up the atmosphere in the air. And in 1992, I did have to go to a compound in North Idaho to research the conspiracy theories that were starting to bubble up. Now, all I have to do is open my phone, and they're all over the place. And so I did rely on much of my expertise from years ago covering those groups and those events. But a lot of it was just following these pathways down the internet and finding churches that keep a list of what percentage of American soldiers come from red states, so that when the final battle comes, they'll know which army units they can count on to fight on their side. Things as specific as that going on. And so some of it was that sort of research. There's a moment in the book when that sort of encapsulates what it felt like for me to have covered this in 1992 when it was on the fringe, and then watched with horror as all these conspiracy theories bubble up into the mainstream. Reese goes to his ex-girlfriend Lucy, who's an editor at the newspaper, and later in the book he's got to track down this militia that is threatening his family, and the name they've taken is Army of the Lord, and they went ahead and made bumper stickers before they realized that when people saw AOL on their trucks, they were going to immediately think, I've got mail. And so so this AOL militia, Reese goes to his ex-girlfriend and says he wants information on him. So he says, can you tell me who's covering the radical right now? And she says, the government reporter. And that, in a way, was the thing that I've felt. And I have had this Rip Van Winkle feeling, having covered the beginning of this, of what I think the beginning of this movement in 1992 when I covered Ruby Ridge, and then watching the way in which these conspiracy theories have not only come into the mainstream, but been used in the most cynical ways to continue to push voters away from their best interest. So, I keep climbing up on a soapbox. I apologize. Yeah, back there.
I wonder if you've done this experiment. As you were reading along, we were laughing at certain parts because they're hilarious. And I wonder if you read those pieces in other cities, were they laughing along on the same parts, or like what's the reaction you're getting? The crux of it is what the reaction.
One of the great things about people who read fiction is they tend to be open-minded, at least. And so I was doing a reading in Gainesville, Florida, and hand went up, and the question was, you live in the Northwest, and this sounds like, the Pacific Northwest sounds like such a wild place. What's it like to be surrounded by so much racism? And I was like, I'm in Gainesville, Florida. And the truth is, it's everywhere. And we have an urban-rural divide. I'm sure there are places in Northern California I could go where, conspiracy thinking, and I'm sure there are probably some left-wing conspiracies in this room, that 26% of people think that Donald Trump's assassination attempt was faked. And so it isn't only on one side that this sort of conspiracy thinking can bubble up. But, I actually really look forward to those conversations. One thing I realized in writing the novel, so let's pause and look at Reese Kinnick's character for a moment. In 2016, he's gotten so fed up by the way in which the world is run that he commits an act of violence and runs into the woods to hide. That's the kind of behavior that the people that he reviles would have committed a few years earlier. That idea that both sides are unhappy with the direction of the country is the only thing that happened that people agree on when they're polled. 80% of people always say we're headed in the wrong direction. They're just pointing in opposite directions. And so I think I can have those conversations. I really look forward to being challenged. This is my third week of book tour. I started in Spokane, Washington. I will be going to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and Moscow, Idaho. One thing I vowed when I finished this book and when I finished writing Shane's point of view is I want to have as many of those conversations as possible. I grew up with a kid who, we were such great friends. We were huge science nerds together. We went to the Star Wars movies together. He is now a flat earther. And I've sort of avoided talking to him. And now I just really want to sit down with him. I think, I'm not going to try to convince him to give up his religious views because they've helped him apparently with a whole lot of other issues. But I think I can convince this guy the world is round. And I will have done my part, I think, to solve the problems of the world by convincing my first grade friend that all those planets we saw in Star Wars were indeed round. Alderaan even was round. Yeah.
Jess, I'm from your hometown.
Oh, are you? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and I wondered if you might want to talk to the group about the West Valley To Kill a Mockingbird incident.
Yeah. Boy, I'm not sure I do actually. Yeah, there was a teacher who was fired for a teacher in my hometown who the class was reading To Kill a Mockingbird, and the N-word came up, and their policy was not to say the N-word in class, but to say the N-word so as not to offend students. And this teacher, who wasn't the teacher in this class, he was a Spanish teacher in a very different class, heard the kids talking about it, and in a self-destructive moment of I guess what he thought free speech, decided he would read this part aloud while his students filmed him and then put it online. It turns out that he is also a Christian nationalist and kind of a right-wing tweeter, and would evangelize to the kids sometimes. And these are always tough issues for a writer because, you know, I'm a free speech absolutist. Do I think people should be fired for or lose their jobs for saying certain words? But I also know what it's like to be in a school, and if kids are invited to use racial epithets, I think it makes perfect sense that a school would say, why don't we not say this word in class? And the fact that it wasn't his class. So it is sort of embroiling, it's boiling up the school. And it's one of those things that's made to boil up the world. And this teacher, who I think sees it as his, as his calling to stand up for, I guess language is what he would say. It's in many ways I'm slightly torn, and yet I think it was such a strange, self-destructive, and I think intentionally provocative thing to do, that I think it has a lot less to do with free speech in this case and more to do with with him trying to get his point of view across. But again, I mean, it's that's not an easy one for me. I don't think we should be banning books on the left or the right. I don't think we should be policing language necessarily. But if I'm a teacher in a school and that's the policy, I think that policy probably has a good reason for being. No one was stopping him for wandering around his house saying whatever he wants, or even on the street corner, But so yeah, it's a tricky one. I was kind of glad to be out of town for that one, honestly. So thank you for bringing it up. Other questions? Yeah, Jim.
I love this book.
Oh, thank you.
I also love the way you read.
Oh, thanks.
I have to say, what you chose, the exposition of the story, I hadn't realized the first time around that the deliberate repetition of the note that his daughter writes by way of explaining why she's leaving her kids, and the fact that each time you repeat it, you have a little more information that tells the reader about Reese, and then he has a reaction to that. I mean, it's just so natural and so brilliant.
Oh, thanks.
I just want to gush.
Oh,
That's it. No question.
No, Spokane guy, that's how you ask a question. Just a compliment is, I appreciate both questions. Thank you, Jim. I will talk a little bit about that because it was interesting starting where I did, and I knew that I wanted this book to start from page one with his quest. He's got to come right out. And I thought, if you've been in the woods for 7 years, I really wanted to jar him out of that moment. And so each time he reads, and it's a bit of a stretch to think he would go back up to the top of the note every time. But I wanted that feeling. I wanted him to be lurched out of this stasis that he's fallen into by moving up to this cabin. And so each moment of that realization that this is how his daughter sees him was meant to be a sort of kick that wakes him up and makes him realize, I've abandoned my family for this, and to really move him into action. The other thing I realized is that he's been pretty much out of the world. He's had some friends that live up there. He's he's tried to live completely off the grid with solar panels and batteries and a compost toilet, but he's really not very good at it. And the other thing about him is that every person that he has to go to for help now on this odyssey, this picaresque that he's going to be on, is furious with him. And when you write a character who every person is mad at that character, it makes for both great comedy and great pathos. So thank you. I was pleased with the way the book started, and I think it's one of the reasons that it came to me so much more quickly than other novels. So maybe one more, and then I'll sign some books. Yeah.
On the topic of dialogue, when you're writing it, do you speak it out loud? Do you have someone that you kind of role play it with to make it sound the way you want it to sound or natural?
Yeah, I read everything out loud, usually when I finish writing or else the next morning when I start. It's kind of how I get back into what I've done. I read it to hear how it sounds. Dialogue, I mean, you can hear me, I'm stuttering sometimes and saying and so dialogue isn't exactly recorded by writers the way it comes out. It is a sort of staged version of it, and you want it to sound as familiar and as recognizable as dialogue as possible, as the way we speak. But there is a certain kind of stagecraft to it. And one of the great experiences that I had in writing The Angel of Rome, my last book, was the title story I wrote with Eduardo Ballerini, who's does the narration for my audiobooks. And Eduardo and I have become friends. I really like him. And we were working on this story together. I was writing it based on ideas I had, but also some experiences he had. He lived in Trastevere in Rome, and so we would sort of go back and forth. But I flew to New York and had him table read the story. And I've heard my dialogue in my voice, but it was the most thrilling moment. It was what a playwright must feel to see your work, come to life that way. And so, it made me think, it's one of those entirely unhelpful writing tips to say, hire a troupe of actors and have them read your dialogue aloud. But I do think if you're a writer and you're working on, on scenes with dialogue, it can be great to bounce them off other people, to hear how they sound. And it also helps with those attributions, because you start to come up with dialogue that you can tell who's speaking. You don't have to have a dialogue tag. And it's one of my favorite parts. I wish I could narrate all of my audiobooks. The last one I did was The Financial Lives of the Poets, and I thought I did a marvelous job. The Audible reviewers find Eduardo Ballerini a little better than me, it turns out, though, by about a star, it seems like. So I'm really glad to have found him. But I love that. I love reading the work aloud. To me, that's the process that for me sort of cements it. And I think, most readers, that's kind of what they're doing, is repeating the words aloud in their mind too. So, one more question.
During the writing process,
Mm-hmm.
There's the writing and coming up with this manuscript, and then there's the editing.
Yeah.
What proportion is which?
What proportion is writing and what proportion is editing? I honestly don't think I can separate them. I don't write drafts for the most part. I used to have this really terrible analogy for how I write. I would say it was like my older daughter, when she was young, I was a somewhat single dad at times, and so I had to get her ready for school. And I would say it's like combing ratty hair. You have to keep going back up and going back through. And finally, some nice person pulled me aside at reading and said, "You were torturing your daughter. You combed ratty hair from the bottom." And I'm like, "Oh!" And so I immediately called her and apologized, because I just yanking brushes through her hair all those years. But I go back up and I read and I make sure it's working, and I rewrite and rewrite. By the time a book comes out, the sentences have been rewritten 5, 6, 12 times. There is always a later editing pass, to for continuity to make sure that, you know, that you get things right. But usually when I write the last sentence, it's not that the book is done, but it's probably about 95% there. And so that constantly going back up and working my way through is a way to make sure that it has that it sounds the same, that the characters have a sort of consistency, that everything, you know, sort of moves smoothly through. I think other writers, I know plenty of writers who are draft writers, but it's just never been the way I work. If I feel like there's a sentence that's off or a description that isn't right, it's like a rock in my shoe. I cannot go forward until I've gone back and fixed that one part. And even a book like this, where I'm writing quickly, I still, when I got to the end of it it was about October of 2024. I always have this thing I do when I write the last sentence. Like a Vegas dealer, I clap my hands and do that. It's never really the last sentence because I have to keep writing it. But I remember finishing the book and being really pleased that emotionally it had come together, that I understood these characters more, that the humor had worked and the suspense. And I was really pleased with it. And I remember calling my agent, you know, a month or two before the election and saying, I sure hope when this comes out it reads like historical fiction. And I was so disappointed that it was not. So, with that, I would love to sign books and chat a little more, and thank you so much for coming.
Alright folks, you can purchase your copies of the books if you want at the front registers that were by the front door when you came in. I'm going to have Jess sit back here for signing, so you can just come on back. Also, I'm going to clear a little bit of a pathway of the chairs. Feel free to keep sitting if you want. I just want to let you know. But yeah, let's give one more round of applause.
I have this one here, and I have this one.
I see it. I saw a book over there from Anna.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I joined when I discovered writing.
Under Anna's.
Oh my
Devers Chapman's going to be back. Devers had a good game today, but
I'm gonna sneak by you guys.
there's no doubt that they are struggling tremendously.
I think Devers is the key.